They laughed first, not because the car was funny, but because he was standing next to it. In a room filled with power, money, and polished smiles, one black janitor became the joke. His old Mustang was called junk, his presence treated like a mistake, and the cameras captured every second of his humiliation. No one expected him to respond. No one thought he had anything to prove. And that was the point. But moments later, something happened that drained the laughter from the room and replaced it with a silence so heavy it felt dangerous. What was hidden inside that rusted car wasn't just machinery. It was truth, stolen brilliance, and a lifetime of being underestimated because of who he was. This isn't just a story about a car or a powerful CEO. It's about how easily society decides someone's worth, and what happens when that judgment is horribly wrong. Before we go back, let us know where you're watching from, and if you're new here, subscribe to our channel Horovia and connect with us for daily new stories. Because tomorrow, I've got something extra special for you. So what really happened when that engine turned on, and why did it change everything? Elijah Brooks lived a life most people never noticed. Every morning before sunrise, he unlocked service doors, pushed his mop cart down echoing halls, and made sure buildings meant for powerful people looked perfect before they arrived. He wore the same faded work jacket every day, kept his head down, and spoke only when necessary. Not because he had nothing to say, but because experience had taught him that silence was safer. To the world, Elijah was just the janitor at Whitfield Aeronautics, a background figure, someone you stepped around, not someone you looked at. Few knew that his hands, steady and precise, had once held blueprints instead of cleaning rags. Fewer still knew what those hands were capable of building. Outside of work, Elijah's life was quiet and modest. He drove an old, rusted Mustang that rattled when it idled and drew stares wherever it went. Not admiring ones, judging ones. Neighbors assumed it matched him, outdated, worn, disposable. Elijah never corrected them. The car wasn't there to impress anyone. It was there because it mattered. That morning, the Whitfield Aeronautics Innovation Showcase buzzed with anticipation. Executives, investors, and media flooded the building, celebrating the future of technology. Elijah moved through the crowd unseen, cleaning footprints off marble floors as conversations about billion-dollar deals floated above his head. The gap between who was valued and who was invisible had never felt wider. What Elijah didn't know was that before the day ended, that gap would be exposed, publicly, painfully. A single moment would force everyone in that room to confront their assumptions, and the quiet life he had carefully maintained was about to collide with a spotlight he never asked for but could no longer avoid. The atmosphere inside the showcase began to shift the moment attention turned toward Elijah. At first, it was subtle. Glances held a second too long, smiles curving with quiet judgment. The rusted Mustang parked in a VIP lane became an unspoken signal, a permission slip for ridicule. Phones lifted. Whispers spread. The crowd sensed entertainment, and humiliation was easier to enjoy when it didn't belong to them. Elijah felt it before he fully understood it, the pressure in the air, the way footsteps slowed near him, the way eyes followed his movements as he pushed his mop cart past polished shoes and tailored suits. He kept his posture steady, his pace controlled. Years of being underestimated had taught him how to move without inviting attention, how to exist without provoking questions. But that morning, restraint wasn't enough. The laughter came in waves, growing louder as the story formed around him without his consent. A janitor with a junk car, a mistake parked where it didn't belong, a symbol of someone who had overstepped their place. The cruelty wasn't shouted at first. It didn't need to be. It lived in smirks, in raised eyebrows, in the confidence that nothing would challenge the hierarchy of that room. Security watched but didn't intervene. Cameras recorded without shame. The powerful felt safe because they always had. Elijah stood at the center of it, his silence misread as weakness, his stillness mistaken for surrender. What they didn't see was the control it took to remain calm, the discipline required not to react when every instinct urged him to disappear. When Elijah finally moved toward the Mustang, the crowd leaned in. Anticipation replaced mockery. People expected failure. They expected embarrassment. They expected confirmation of everything they already believed. This was no longer just about a car. It had become a test, staged without consent, with Elijah's dignity as the price. The moment stretched thin as he reached the driver's seat. The building seemed to hold its breath. Then the sound emerged, not loud, not aggressive, but impossibly precise. A controlled hum that didn't match the assumptions that had filled the room seconds earlier. The laughter collapsed into silence. Smiles faded. Confidence drained away. That silence didn't bring relief. It brought fear. Engineers felt it first. Something was wrong, not with the machine, but with the story they had told themselves. Power without spectacle unsettled them. Control without permission threatened everything they understood. Elijah stepped out calmly, his expression unchanged, as security moved in. Not violently, just efficiently, order being restored. Inside offices above the showroom floor, screens lit up, files surfaced, old records resurfaced. A life that had been erased began to reappear in fragments. The more they uncovered, the more dangerous the truth became. This was no accident, no trick, no lucky moment. And as Elijah was quietly escorted away, the real tension took shape, not around him, but around those who now understood what they had mocked. Because if a man they had dismissed so easily held something this powerful, then the system that kept him invisible was about to face consequences it could no longer control. What began as ridicule was turning into reckoning, and no one in that building was ready for what came next. The silence that followed did not fade, it spread. It crawled through hallways and offices, settling into conversations that suddenly felt unsafe to finish. People began speaking in lowered voices, careful tones replacing earlier confidence. The Mustang was no longer a joke. It had become a problem, and problems in places built on power demanded control. Elijah was escorted away from the public floor, past glass walls where executives pretended not to stare. No one apologized. No one explained. He wasn't accused of anything, yet the message was clear. His presence had disrupted the order. The same system that had ignored him minutes earlier now moved quickly to contain him. Efficiency, when threatened, always revealed itself. Behind closed doors, panic sharpened into calculation. The CEO replayed the moment again and again. The sound, the silence, the way trained engineers had frozen. That reaction bothered him more than the humiliation. Laughter could be dismissed. Fear could not. He demanded answers, demanded files, demanded someone explain how a janitor could command that kind of reaction without permission. The deeper the search went, the worse it became. Employment records told only part of the story. The real danger lived in the gaps, missing years, abandoned citations, patents that jumped steps no one could explain. Old footage surfaced, grainy and forgotten, showing Elijah not in gloves and coveralls, but standing confidently beside prototypes, his hands guiding conversations that shaped the future. What unsettled them most was not what Elijah had built, but what had been taken from him. As whispers grew, so did the pressure. The offer came quickly. Money, protection, silence. A clean solution wrapped in politeness. The kind of deal that erased people without leaving marks. They expected gratitude. They expected relief. They expected compliance. Elijah's refusal changed everything. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was calm, controlled, final. And that calm refusal felt like defiance. For people used to ownership, being told no by someone they had dismissed as invisible felt like an insult they could not tolerate. The punishment followed fast. Access revoked. Badge deactivated. A life quietly cut loose. But outside those walls, something else was happening. The truth, once disturbed, refused to settle back into place. Independent researchers noticed the sudden activity. Engineers shared concerns in private channels. A name long erased began to circulate again, not loudly but persistently. And when official announcements appeared days later, they didn't come from the company that had laughed. They came from somewhere new. A rival system, a verified breakthrough, a demonstration vehicle that should not have existed, yet did. The same rusted Mustang, the same controlled hum, only now it was backed by data no one could dismiss and oversight no one could silence. Inside the corporation, replication attempts failed. Every shortcut collapsed. Every stolen fragment refused to work. The technology didn't respond to force. It demanded understanding. And understanding was the one thing they didn't have. Fear replaced arrogance. Investigations followed ambition. Old decisions resurfaced. People who had stayed quiet for years found courage when the balance shifted. What began as a public mockery had exposed a history too heavy to bury again. And as the walls started closing in, one truth became unavoidable. This was never just about racism in a room or a joke at a man's expense. It was about a system that decided who deserved credit, who deserved visibility, and who could be erased without consequence. That system was cracking. And the fallout was just beginning. The breaking point arrived without warning, swift and unforgiving. What began as quiet pressure turned into collapse the moment investigators stepped inside the company's walls. Screens went dark. Offices emptied. Executives who once laughed now avoided eye contact, their confidence drained by the weight of evidence they could no longer control. Years of erased credit, altered records, and stolen innovation surfaced all at once, stitched together into a truth too clear to deny. At the center of it all stood the same man they had mocked. Elijah Brooks was no longer invisible. His work, once buried beneath other names, was laid bare in technical hearings and verified demonstrations. The engine they had laughed at was revealed as a breakthrough decades ahead of its time, designed with balance, restraint, and integrity in a world that had rewarded greed and force. The realization hit hard. The future they claimed to own had never belonged to them. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy. Every document read aloud tightened the silence. Every expert confirmation landed like a blow. The humiliation Elijah had endured in public was now mirrored back at those who had dismissed him, only magnified, undeniable, and permanent. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a pattern, a system that decided who deserved recognition and who could be erased without consequence. Outside, the world watched as the image of power cracked. Careers ended. Empires unraveled. The cost of arrogance finally came due. Elijah did not celebrate. He did not seek revenge. He simply stood steady, carrying the quiet strength of someone who had survived being underestimated his entire life and still chose truth over bitterness. In that moment, the story stopped being about a single insult or a single man. It became a reckoning, proof that racism does not always shout, but it always leaves damage behind. And as the verdict settled into history, one question remained, heavy and unavoidable. How many others were silenced before the world finally chose to listen? The tension did not release when the verdicts were read. It deepened. The courtroom may have closed, but the consequences were only beginning to ripple outward. News coverage spread fast, not with outrage at first, but disbelief. Commentators struggled to explain how brilliance could be hidden in plain sight for decades, how a man reduced to cleaning floors had once helped shape a future he was never allowed to claim. The question hung everywhere, uncomfortable and accusing. Inside the corporation, what remained of leadership fractured. Former allies turned on one another. Statements contradicted records. Apologies appeared carefully worded, late and hollow. None of them reached Elijah. None of them needed to. The damage had already spoken for itself. The humiliation he had endured for years, quiet, private, normalized, had finally been exposed in full daylight. What made the moment unbearable for many was Elijah's composure. There was no speech, no demand for recognition, no public anger, just presence, calm, control. The same steadiness that had been mistaken for weakness now stood as undeniable proof of strength. It forced the world to confront something harder than guilt: accountability. For those watching, the realization cut deep. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was familiar, too familiar. A pattern repeated across workplaces, classrooms, courtrooms, and streets, where talent is ignored, voices are dismissed, and dignity is denied because of race. Elijah's story didn't shock because it was rare. It shocked because it was. As cameras faded and attention shifted, Elijah walked away from the noise once again. Not erased this time, but changed. The system that tried to bury him had collapsed under its own weight. Still, the cost remained visible in the years he could never reclaim, the recognition delayed until it was impossible to ignore. And as the world moved on, one final truth lingered, heavy and unresolved. Justice had arrived, but only after humiliation, loss, and silence were endured far too long. If this could happen to a man capable of changing the future, then who else was still waiting to be seen? In the months that followed, life settled into a quieter rhythm for Elijah Brooks. But it was a different kind of quiet. Not the silence of being overlooked, but the calm of standing on truth that could no longer be erased. He returned to his work on his own terms, not chasing recognition, not seeking applause. The world had finally seen what he was capable of, yet he chose purpose over praise, balance over bitterness. The rusted Mustang remained unchanged. Same dents, same faded paint. It still turned heads, but now for a different reason. It stood as proof that brilliance does not need permission to exist, and that greatness can live in places society refuses to look. Elijah drove it not as a symbol of victory, but as a reminder of love, loss, and resilience forged in the shadows. The company that once mocked him became a cautionary tale. Investigations reshaped industries, policies changed, conversations began where silence once lived, yet the damage done could not be undone. Years stolen, credit denied, a life forced smaller so others could feel larger. That truth mattered more than any apology. This story is not just about one man or one moment. It reflects a reality faced by countless people whose intelligence, creativity, and humanity are questioned simply because of their race. Racism does not always appear as open hatred. Sometimes it hides in laughter and assumptions, in who gets believed and who gets erased. Elijah's story asks us to look closer at who we ignore, who we underestimate, and who we decide belongs. Because the next great idea, the next breakthrough, the next truth that could change everything may already be in the room, quietly waiting to be seen. So the question isn't whether racism still exists. The question is, when it shows itself, will we recognize it or repeat it?